Hi there, welcome to today's session of Every Mark Matters with Mr. McDonald. Today we're having a look at Edexcel History Paper 2, Anglo-Saxon and Norman Britain. I've got a lovely question to look at today. Our question of the day is explain why there was a succession crisis after the death of Edward the Confessor, which is a 12-mark question. These exam questions are made up of three components. Let's begin to break it down so we can determine what the exam question actually wants us to do. So to begin with, we have got the command phrase. In this instance, the command phrase is explain why, and what you need to do for an explain why is present three reasons and explain them. Three is really important. If you do two reasons, you are capped at 8 marks, so you won't get any more than 8 marks. Okay, so the next part of the exam question is the focus. So that is the area of knowledge that we need to focus on to add into our knowledge, add into our answer. So what knowledge does this question actually want from us? And we are looking for why there was a succession crisis after the death of Edward the Confessor. Okay, so press pause now, take the time to consider reasons why there might be a succession crisis after the death of Edward the Confessor. Use your revision guides, use your textbooks. I'll see you shortly. Okay, right, so there's loads of different reasons, and of course what you can do is you can just go through all of the contenders and just explain why they believe they had a claim to the throne, or you could talk about the battles. There's loads of great stuff here. So I'm going to do a mix of that. The first thing I might say is I might refer to the reign of Edward himself. Remember, Edward realistically only cares about religion. You know, it's very easy to manipulate. On top of that, he relies too much on the House of Godwin. They do basically the leading of the country for him. You know, he doesn't, as we know, he doesn't choose he chooses a successor, he just chooses loads of them, but he doesn't have any children. You know, so he's got no one to replace him, which leads to him choosing, or lots of people inferring or deciding that they could be king after him. Alright, and a prime example of that might be my next reason why there's a succession crisis, and that's Harold Godwinson. You know, he is the son of Godwin from the House of Godwin. He rules the country. When Edward is sick. The House of Godwin, remember, are the most powerful family of earls. This means that basically the House of Godwin, they rule the Witan. You know, they have overall say or overall control of what happens in the Witan. You know, and I think that, and remember, you know, he's such a reliable person, or such an important person for Edward, that he goes on embassy to Normandy. Which of course he promises to support William, or he promises the throne to William, which he later breaks his promise. And I think possibly you know, as I said, you could do a paragraph about William of Normandy if you wanted to. You could do a paragraph about Howard Adrada if you wanted to, or even Edgar Effeling. I think what I'm going to do, just to keep it challenging, is I'm going to do a paragraph about the Witan. And remember, the Witan, they are in essence the Anglo-Saxon government. They can choose who can be king, and obviously they choose Harold Godwinson. And on top of that, is they choose Harold Godwinson knowing that William believes he has a claim to the throne. And moreover, we've got this whole situation whereby they're knowingly putting the country in danger because they know that William will come and invade to claim the throne. Okay? So I think they are a prime candidate for why there's a succession crisis. So, we've looked at the command phrase, we've looked at the focus of the question. Let's actually have a little look at what the question, what Edexcel want from us. Okay? And we do this by looking through something called a second order concept. You don't need to memorize these, and you don't need to, you don't actually need to know this. This is just what's something called disciplinary history. It's what the exam board want from us. All right, and in essence, for this question, it is causation. All right. As in, how did one thing lead to another? How did the death of Edward the Confessor lead to a succession crisis? So that means you can use in your answer phrases like this led to. This meant that. As a result. These are great phrases for you to use that infer causation. Okay, right, so just before we look at the mark scheme, just a polite reminder, this is a 12-mark question, so that means you just need to do 3 paragraphs, and you're going to spend 15 minutes writing it. Okay, let's begin to think about now. So we know what the question is instructing us to do. We know what knowledge we need to use. We know what Edexcel want us to do. Let's think about the mark scheme. So what does the mark scheme want us to do? So this question, you are assessed in AO1 and AO2. That is your knowledge. And AO2 is explanation. Okay? And your answer will be graded in level 1, 2, 3 and 4, but I only care about 3 and 4. Alright? So allow me to explain how you will be scored in each of these, or what you need to do in order to reach these scores. And again, a level 3 does not mean a grade 3, a level 4 does not mean a grade 4. It's just the quality of your answer. Okay? So first and foremost, you need 2 facts per paragraph. Okay, for level 4 knowledge, you need 2 precise facts per para. Okay, in terms of your explanation, what you need to be doing is for level 3, you need to have 2 sentences of explanation per paragraph. Okay, for level 4, you need to have 3 sentences. And that is structured as how, why, so what. I'm going to run out of space on my page here, but let me just define what I mean by that. So let's just say we are talking about, let's just say we're talking about Harold Godwinson as our reason. Okay, right, so let's say how, so we're doing how first, so how did Harold Godwinson how did the succession crisis lead to, I'm just going to put HG, So there's your how, there's your first level of explanation. Let's have a look at your second. Why did the succession crisis lead to HG? Okay, how, why, so what? I always imagine a moody teenager saying so what to me. You know, so what? So what's special about this reason? So why is HG important? Okay, right. You have got 15 minutes. You need to spend 15 minutes doing this to write as much as you can. Press pause, use any resources that you need to. Ideally, use your knowledge in your head, but press pause and take the time to have a go at answering this question. And then come back to me and we'll self-assess together. Take care. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. So my purple pen ran out of ink, so I've gone with pink for now. Let's have a look at my answer. So hopefully there you've spent 15 minutes explaining why there was a succession crisis after the death of Edward the Confessor. Alright, what I'm going to do is I am going to annotate my answer with AO1 and AO2. Remember, AO1 is knowledge, AO2 is explanation. Alright, and because I'm very conscious of my handwriting, I'm just going to read out my answer to you as I annotate. Okay? So one reason why there was a succession crisis after the death of Edward the Confessor was because of the role of Harold Godwinson. Okay? So that is AO2 there. So it's simply AO2 just because I've explained it. I've presented a reason. Okay? Right, for example. Now, for example is a great phrase to demonstrate knowledge, to describe your knowledge. For example, Harold, along with his brother Tostig, AO1, was known as the two pillars. Was known as the two pillars of Anglo-Saxon Britain. Right, that's going to put AO1, but because it's precise knowledge, I'm going to put AO1 plus next to it. Of Britain, mostly Harold did the ruling over England during Edward's reign. So again, there's AO1 and AO1 again, loads of knowledge here. All right, so that sentence there, or those two sentences there, that's my first fact within my answer. Okay, so as you can see, I've basically said that Harold did all the ruling with his brother Tostig, but it was mostly Harold. Let's have a look at my second fact. I also know that, and again, that's another great way where I've simply just presented another fact. I also know that Harold went to Normandy in 1064 on an embassy, a political visit, and supposedly promised the throne to William of Normandy after Edward died. Right, so there's some AO1 for the embassy, AO1 for William, and AO1 for the promise. Okay, and then again, there's my second fact. Right? So I've presented the reason, I've put my first fact, I've put my second fact. Now what I need to do is I need to go into my explanation. Okay, right, let's have a go. Right, so now we're looking at explanation. So ideally, remember I'm going how, why, so what. So I'm thinking about how did Harold Godwinson lead to a succession crisis? This led to a succession crisis. This led to is a great phrase for demonstrating that. This led to a succession crisis as when Harold became King of England, King Harold II, it inevitably created a conflict between him and the other contenders. Perfect. There's my AO2 how. Alright, I've simply said how it created a conflict. As a result, again, another great explanation phrase that's all linked to causation. As a result, William was furious that Harold broke his promise and began creating an invasion force that led to the Battle of Hastings. Here is my why. And again, there's loads of knowledge here with Battle of Hastings, invasion force, and so on. This shows Harold's actions created a succession crisis, as his greed and obsession with power led to him becoming king and inevitably a conflict between him and William. and there is the so what. So why is it important? All right, so you can see within that first paragraph is I've presented a reason, I've got two facts with loads of knowledge in it, and I've gone how, why, so what. Okay, let's see how I do for the next one. Another reason why there was a succession crisis was because of the reign of Edward the Confessor. Same again, AO2. This was when Edward allowed key positions in the Witan to be taken by members of the House of Godwin. Right, here's the AO1 here, and AO1 here when I'm talking about Godwin and the Witan, and allowed them to amass huge amounts of land. Again, AO1. So there's my first fact there. Basically, Edward's just giving land and power away, isn't he? Additionally, as Edward became more interested in religion as his reign went on, leadership of England fell into the hands of key individuals such as Earl Godwin and Harold Godwinson. So again, there's my AO1 here again, all right? And that is my second fact. And you'll notice that, in this instance, I've just used one sentence to describe my knowledge, one sentence to describe my second piece of knowledge. It might even be more, and what I might do is I might even extend that out to maybe 2 or 3 sentences. Okay, let's have a look at explanation. This created a rivalry between the king and Godwins, which led to Edward the Confessor choosing 4 different people to become king after he died. Right, perfect. There's my how. All right, the rivalry between the two created a succession crisis because he chose 4 different people. All right, let's have a look at my explanation. This created a succession crisis as there was no clear ruler after he died, and his actions created the problems of 1066. So there's even more of my how. Okay, so I've said how he gave away these positions, how it created a success crisis. As a result of his reign, Harold Godwinson believed he had a rightful claim to the throne after running the country. William was told by Harold on Edward's behalf that he should be king, and Hadrada and Edgar believed that they had a loose claim. There's the why. Without Edward giving up power so early in his reign and not identify a clear successor, the succession crisis of 1066 would never have happened. And there's my so what. And again, all I'm saying is how did Edward's reign lead to a succession crisis? Why did Edward's reign lead to a succession crisis? So what? Why is Edward's reign important for the succession crisis? Okay? And then finally, a final reason why there was a succession crisis after the death of Edward the Confessor was because of the Witan. Again, AO2 here. They were a group of earls and archbishops who advised the king on making decisions and laws. AO1. There's some knowledge. The Witan was mostly made up of a lot of House of Godwin, who ruled 2/3 of the land in England. Again, AO1 there. So here's my first fact here. So there's my AO1, or there's fact number 1. It was important for Edward to keep the respect and backing from the Witan, because if they didn't, then all of the king's power would be lost and conflict arises. Perfect. Here's my second fact. Okay, so again, I'm simply referring to the fact that he has to keep the Witan sweet, right? So let's see how this creates a succession crisis. So literally, just as the others, I've presented the reason, AO2. I've got loads of different facts in there. That 2/3 of England, that's AO1 plus. All right. I've defined who the Witan were. Let's have a look at where I say how it led to a succession crisis, why, and so what. This led to, again, I've used that phrase, a succession crisis, as they did not want a foreign ruler, as they felt it would disrupt the country. Right, there's the how. As a result, they chose Harold Godwinson, a key member of the Witan, with huge amounts of influence, who created the conflict of 1066. There's the why. This shows the influence of the Witan's role in the succession crisis, as they chose Harold over William. There's the so what. Perfect. So throughout my entire answer there, I've constantly rewritten the question and presented a reason. I have brought in 2 facts per paragraph, and I have how, why, so, whatted it. Alright, so if I just go straight back to my mark scheme, or the success criteria down here, have I got 2 precise facts in my first one? Yeah. Have I got 2 precise facts in my third one? Yeah. In my second one? Yeah. I'm not so sure about the third one. I've got 2/3 about the Witten. I'm going to say no. You know, although 2/3 of England and the Witten, yeah, it's not too bad. Have I got how, why, so, what in my first paragraph? Yes. Have I got how, why, so, what in my second paragraph? Yes. Have I got how, why, so, what in my third paragraph? Absolutely. Okay. Right. So in terms of how am I doing out of 12, you know, in essence, I've definitely got, in that third paragraph, I've definitely got 2 facts in there. So in essence, I'm really probably a low level 4. You know, I'm mostly in level 4, so it pulls it down. In this instance, level 4 would be 10 to 12 out of 12. So what the exam board will most likely say is that this is 11 out of 12. A kind examiner might even call it 12 out of 12. I personally would call it 11 out of 12. All right? Take the time to self-assess your own. I look forward to reading it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.